life skills, or how do I get to that next stage, or doing a lot of things. If you want to find the truth, you got to search a lot of things. You cannot get tired. So you have to have resilience. This whole admissions test, a part of it is how conscientious are you?
How did you manage your time?
Every moment is accounted for, and I have a specific routine.
What is some advice people who are currently applying to med school or would like to apply in the future?
If you're applying right now, this essentially the strategy is,
I do the same thing. I told you that I never would. I told you I changed, even when I knew I never could. Know that I can't find nobody else.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our Lab-Coats and Beyond speaker series. With us today is Dr. Behrouz Moemeni. Dr. Moemeni is the founder and CEO of BeMo Academic Consulting and SourceSmart, two very well-known organizations in the professional admission industry. Dr. Moemeni has strived to change the screening and university processes in the way they select students, as well as changing the hiring process in organizations to favor a more well-rounded applicant. He is meticulous about scientifically proven programs, services, and products that are created at his companies. He commences to his training as a scientist with a PhD in immunology from the University of Toronto. He is the recipient of 19 awards during his student career, including the prize in biology. Dr. Moemeni is a well-established presenter, not only scientifically, but in the world of business as well. He is one of the world's most sought-after and expensive admission screening experts, and is hired by institutions around the world for his expertise. Additionally, Dr. Moemeni is a co-author to the best-selling book Ultimate Guide to Med School Admissions, amongst many other books that have been listed in the video description. He has been featured in World Report's The Student Doctor Network, and now finally, IgNITE. Dr. Moemeni continues to make time to directly interact with students, and tonight is no exception. We will be discussing his pathway as well as his entrepreneurial drive that pushed him to not only graduate with a PhD, but also create these highly successful organizations in the effort to help hundreds of thousands of people. And with that being said, let's just jump right into the video.
So I think I want to start off by personally thanking you, Dr. Moemeni. I think for many of us that want to go down this pre-med journey or medicine journey, we've seen your YouTube video or we've seen some sort of advertisement where that familiar voice and face comes on. And, now to see it, although not in the flesh, but virtually, it's almost as though we're seeing this, med celebrity. So thank you once again for joining us tonight. I think many of us know BeMo, but we don't know so much about yourself. So maybe the first question that we will start off with is you telling us a little bit about who you are and how you actually got to, where you are today.
Sure. I'll maybe give you a little bit of a background. I'm not going to bore you guys with my life story, but I'll share a little bit of essentially myself and eventually how we got to where we are now. I actually came to Canada when I was 15 as an immigrant. And when I came, it was at a time when I had to leave a lot of immediate family members behind. I came here with my dad. And of course, not just like most other immigrants, that's just how Canada is. That's why it's a country a lot of people call home, because of the nature of allowing immigrants to come and flourish here. Is when I came, I didn't know English, so it was a challenge just getting assimilated with the culture. And then going through high school, you could imagine not knowing English is not the best way to be able to interact with others. But eventually I got assimilated with the culture. I learned the language. Then, I got into my university studies, and that's when I started to see things that are essentially some of the things I'm doing right now are started back when I was in undergrad. In undergrad, you probably, most of you are in undergrad, maybe some of you doing grad work, but you'll notice there's a point you reach where you're like, okay, what do I really want to do with my life? Because, okay, I'm doing all these school, but eventually I need a job. Like, I need a career. I gotta do something with my life. So I reached that point eventually as well. And the support system, while it was fantastic for teaching you the sciences, because I was a essentially, I did the cell and molecular biology specialist program. It was fantastic training for that, but nothing for life skills or how do I get to that next stage, or like not everybody wants to go to med school, or like what the traditional is. So that's when I realized that, okay, there is some sort of a challenge there. And essentially, I didn't really actually figure it out, guys, just so you know. In undergrad, I didn't know. I'm not going to come and tell you here, I knew exactly what I wanted to know from the start. No, I had no idea. So I actually ended up working for a few years. I ended up working, and then I went into undergrad, started grad school. And that was because it's interesting that you started this conversation by talking about research position. I got a technician job at a laboratory, and then the mentor I had encouraged me to do graduate work. He's like, hey, you're doing the work here, might as well get a PhD. And then I said, okay, yeah, that sounds right. So I started doing my PhD. But during my PhD, I also noticed something that was very interesting. It seemed like, again, the PhD program was well suited to turn you into a scientist and teach you all those skills, but not how to go into alternatives. And secondly, some of the people that were in the program were not really dying to be there, to say the least. They were not really that passionate about science. They were like, they could care less about holding a pipette. So then we go into, I'm being trained as a scientist myself. So I start asking questions, and maybe a little bit too much at the time, especially for where I was at. But then it became clear that, the selection process is not really that scientific itself, which was a little bit ironic because, I'm being trained to be a scientist. Why isn't the selection process to bring people in scientific? And it wasn't anything intentional. It's just that, grad school is a little bit different. But then you compare it to professional programs, it's a little bit more high risk. You would expect that, it's very stringent, it's very scientific, etc. No, it turns out it's not like that at all. Because most of the selection processes that are used right now, and those of you who have applied or are in the process of applying to, let's say, medical school, you may have seen them, personal statements, MCAT, other forms of standardized tests for other programs, interviews, situational judgment tests. Most of these things, for the most part, are not developed scientifically, or even if they were developed scientifically, they don't really pass the test of a scientist. And they were mostly developed back in the 1800s by essentially a psychologist who was interested in figuring out how to have more factory workers for society. So those same things are still with us to this day. Once I've done all this research and, I got a little bit more acquainted, it's like, hey, that makes no sense. So now we have a system that says yes to certain people, no to certain people. If you flip a coin, might actually do better than doing this. Sometimes the mistakes are so bad that maybe flipping a coin might be better. And the fundamental issue here is that, obviously, some people inadvertently, again, this is not intentional by anyone. This is just how the system is. Of course, people are making changes to it as much as they can, but this causes inadvertent bias against individuals. My fundamental belief was, and this probably started as in undergrad, was everyone deserves access to education, because with education, you could choose your own path. And that desire and noticing all of this eventually were partially responsible for me starting BeMo and going down this path, and then eventually starting SwordSmart, which helps universities. So that would be a little bit about how we got here. And to give you, I also tried to give you a little bit of background of who I am and beyond BeMo and SwordSmart and where did all this come from. But my journey started just like anybody else, just like any of you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that within just that, I guess, couple of minutes, we heard a lot of different things going on there. I think you saw a problem. That inquisitive mind was there to ask more questions, and that led you down a path. And I think that's similar to what we did here with Ignite. We saw personally, getting into research wasn't as simple as going to a professor's office and simply saying, listen, I'm eager. I have the capabilities to do it. I just need a little bit of help. It's not that simple. Now we're seeing that you almost have to have some level of training or PhD, masters to even be considered, right? So I just want to commend you on behalf of, I guess, everybody for seeing that problem and kind of facing it head on. Building off of that, maybe we can go into a little bit more of this idea of a scientist and entrepreneur. How was that shift that you made from obviously going into these classrooms where you were, or even in the laboratories where you're doing this pipetting, very clear cut, you have a hypothesis, you know what you need to test. Obviously the answer is you don't know what the answer will be, but at least you're working towards something, to maybe going towards more of this business pathway where, a lot more unknown. You have this idea, but you're highly dependent on a lot of other people wanting to support you. So could you speak a little bit of how it was getting BeMo started and what those initial steps looked like?
Sure. And you know what, one of the things you said was, how did it have to do, how can you essentially use a training as a scientist to do this other thing? It's a question that I get actually quite often, but you'll probably notice that it's actually very similar. There's more similarities. In fact, if you've been trained in the sciences and thinking scientifically, you're going to be a way better entrepreneur than someone who is not. The reason for that is, so what is an entrepreneur? Entrepreneur is essentially, to me, there's different definitions. To me, is somebody who is searching for the truth. Find the truth, creating value that people are willing to invest. So everyone, we have a student that pays or even reads a blog for free on our website. They are investing one way or another in us. That they're like, that's a validation that, hey, yeah, what you got makes sense. I'm investing with you so that we can get to the next stage. But it's very similar to a scientist because, you say, okay, this is a problem, you notice it, and then you say, this is how I'm going to solve it. But in reality, when you're working as an entrepreneur, 90% of things you try fails. Like on a daily basis, on a monthly, yearly, most of the things we do doesn't work out. It's just used as a learning to figure out what is not the answer, which is exactly what I did as a PhD student. Try different things. Most of you might have had, let's say, a summer position or maybe a master's. Most things just don't work in a laboratory setting or any type of scientific research. But that's essentially what happened. And, when I first, so I'll tell you about a little bit of transition. How did I go from, graduate school, and then we went into BeMo. So I had all of these thoughts. I actually didn't know what it was going to be. I had no idea it was going to be BeMo and what we have right now. I actually initially thought I was going to start a tutoring company. There was no name, no company, nothing. I had no idea. The way it went was all of those things that I told you initially, plus the fact that somebody asked me to help them with their graduate application. This person was applying to 5 different programs, 2 of them being some of the brand name universities, Oxford and Cambridge. And after I helped them, they got into all 5 programs. And this was a repeating pattern. People were like, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And it's like, all right, this is a need. So now we have a problem. We have an actual need. Can we turn that into a company and into the mission of what I wanted to do with my life in education? That's eventually became BeMo. And, and essentially this is a company that was started completely organically. I came out of graduate studies with student debt. So it wasn't like there was any money extra to throw around. There wasn't any investors. This is not like a tech company that's like people throw their investors' money. It's not like Uber here. So it was none of that. It was just trial and error. Okay, we have $1. How do we spend this $1? Let's try it. Okay, oh, shoot. Now we don't have $1. Let's just go back to the drawing board. Let's not try it. Okay, it worked. $1 became $2. What do we do with that $2? Do we go buy a yacht? No, that's stupid. First of all, $2 won't buy you a yacht. Secondly, that's just stupid. That doesn't get me up in the morning. how can we put this back into this wheel to make it turn so that we could do more and more and more? And then eventually the snowball effect, and it keeps going, and there's really no end. The end is once everyone has access to education. That's essentially where the end is for BeMo. How can we make sure that if everyone deserves access to education, how can we make something that at least provides the information freely? It's okay to charge for services because, well, it's time. It's someone's highly qualified trained. It's their time. But can the information be provided free of charge? And that's a big part of our mission here at BeMo. And then, of course, if somebody wants us to help them one-on-one, then we have services for that as well.
Yeah, I definitely like that analogy that you gave there with the snowball rolling effect. But I think that obviously it's not going to be a straight path down. There are going to be some bumps in the road. So what were some of the biggest obstacles that, or not some, but maybe you can highlight one of the biggest obstacles that you had in getting that snowball going?
One of the major obstacles we had was a chicken and egg problem, which a lot of entrepreneurs face essentially, which is, okay, we want to do this thing, but we don't have resources. How do we do it? Well, we need the resources. Then how do you do that? So how did we eventually overcome this problem was the realization that you don't need to be perfect. Nothing needs to be perfect. If you guys, I don't know how many, probably not many of you, if any of you remember BeMo's website in, let's say, 2013. It's like, am I gonna, probably none of you will remember, but that was the first website. So who's gonna make a website? We don't know. I will. Who's gonna answer the emails? I will. It's like, there's no other way. There's no perfect. It's that realization was a big turning point that, hey, it's cool. Just let's go ahead with whatever we got instead of trying to wait for perfect or what people think or all that stuff. As long as the mission is right, it's exactly what you want to do. It's the right thing to do. You just do it. And then slowly you add the bells and whistles as you go along as appropriate. So does that kind of answer your question? That was essentially the biggest turning point at BeMo.
Yeah, no, it definitely does answer the question. And it's funny that you mentioned that website and the emails thing. So I guess I'll provide a little background for Ignites, how we started. So it was actually another member. So Guy Sean, I'm not sure if he's here tonight. And so it was his original idea. And then myself, Bianca and Sandra, we came on as well. And so during those initial, I guess, months, it was just the four of us. And we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to do? Okay, we want to help people get into research. Okay, how are we going to do that? We have this idea of doing a case competition. Okay, next step is how do we make sure that we are accessible to everybody? Okay, let's try and be bilingual so that we have both French and English people to participate. Okay, how do we get our name out there? All right, Sandra, you take care of the emailing. Bianca, you get the website. Guy, Sean, Danny, your services aren't really useful yet, so we'll wait. But it's funny how you adapt to the situation. And I think Bianca, through Ignite, she developed this wonderful skill of now becoming great with web design. And I've been able to learn a lot more in terms of communicating with a lot of our business partnerships, which were able to support us through this competition. So those ideas of being versatile and overcoming those challenges is definitely something that I think many of us can attest to. But I think that another key component to getting over those hurdles is who you surround yourself with. And you did mention that you started off with just one person asking you, okay, help me out with this graduate application, and then went really well. And then you started to see that you might have a knack for this. So could you maybe tell us a couple of the mentors that you had, or not even mentors, but people around you that supported you, that really made an impact and helped you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, for sure. There was a lot of people actually involved. It's just, it would be false to pretend that I did this all by myself. There's no way. There's always people that help directly, indirectly. A few people that I could mention here and resources that really helped me out. One of those was actually my graduate PhD supervisor. And this is the person who essentially was not directly involved in helping me create BeMo, but the things they taught me during grad school, the way to think, to, especially thinking scientifically, doing experiments scientifically. So, hey, if things don't work, you have to have your experimental group, you have to have your control group. So those things actually come into play a lot in business, and being patient, doing a lot of things. If you want to find the truth, you got to search a lot of things. You cannot get tired. So you have to have resilience. Those things were all already ready. So one of the advantages I had was having that mentor, Dr. Michael Julius, during my PhD. Essentially, he helped me develop develop certain set of skills that made me prepared for the path I was going to take. Once BeMo was started, then I had obviously help. I had individuals that actually helped me start BeMo. Initially, I had 2 co-founders, and then I ended up with just one of the co-founders. So they did help the same way you're explaining how you had co-founders and divided the task. Same thing happened as well. So there was people that were actually helping. And along the line of that, the other thing that really helped me was just going and getting answers when I had any sort of a knowledge gap. So I just read a lot. That's essentially just, hey, if I don't know something, is there a book, a blog, a YouTube video, something? Can I watch, read, do something so that I can learn and get to the next stage? So those are the things that really helped me. And I'm still the same habits for when I get stuck. I have to go through that process. Over time, I actually also invested heavily in mentors and coaches. So I've had coaches along my journey, and I still hire mentors for specific things where I have zero expertise and I want to get somewhere really quickly. The mentors just help accelerate the process. Yeah, of course, you could always go watch a YouTube video or grab a book, but they give you experience that you may not get from a YouTube video, and they also accelerate that learning process. So I have used all of those tools to help me over the years, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, that those mentors they're definitely that catalyst in terms of this reaction that we have of personal development. So you mentioned that obviously they're a very key component to BeMo and a key component to your personal journey. Something that I've always been curious is, how are you able to, pick and choose who is going to be that ideal mentor to go on and represent BeMo when interacting with that pre-med or that graduate student? How are you able to, now I don't want to say vet, but how can you look at them and say, oh, this person is able to represent us, and I know they can provide those skills and those capabilities that student wants?
So what we do at BeMo is we have a specific process to first select our essentially coaches, admission experts, and then a specific process to train them. So initially, when we started BeMo, I developed all of these, and I used to do a lot of the mentorship myself, and through trial and error, we put a lot of things together. But for example, the hiring process is first stage. We do an assessment using SwordSmart. So I try to take my own medicine as much as possible. So BeMo actually uses the tools developed by SwordSmart to do the screening process. And we select them based on intrinsic motivation, conscientiousness, and coachability. Because if someone's going to be a model for our students, we believe they require those 3 qualities, just like any other profession. That's one. Secondly, we do a functional assessment of their ability. So if they're going to, for example, help somebody with interviews, we need to know, can you do that? If you're going to review someone's personal statement, hey, can I see a sample of you doing that? Then, of course, we do reference checks, and we do reference checks a little bit different than anybody else does, because in reality, I actually don't think reference letters are the best tool. So we have modified what we do, and I can't tell you what it is so that our applicants don't figure it out. But we use that as well. And the way we do this is we allow independent assessments at each stage so that we get as much of an unbiased selection as possible. And then we compare each applicant to the rest of the pool of applicants. Normally, our success rate is somewhere between 5 to 10%. So to get hired at BeMo is 5 to 10% that you're actually going to get to the final stage. Once you're in, there's lots of training. There is training for every stage. And even then, it's not really set in stone that you're hired here and it's all good and you're going to go work with our students. The training, first of all, is theoretical training. Then they have to actually write quizzes, and I think they have to pass 80 or 85%. That's the passing grade. So it's not like 50%. They have to do really well. Then when they're ready, they go with our lead trainers who have a lot of experience with them. They do coaching with students, so they're monitored. And once the lead trainers say, okay, you're good, you have sound judgment, now you could go and do this on your own. That's the only time they can. We actually spend quite a lot of time and money making sure we select the right people and train them as much as we can before we allow them to go interact with students, because, well, that's what the business is all about. So that part of it is a huge focus of ours.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it provides a lot of, I guess, reassurance to anybody that wants to go with BeMo or your services, that just from obviously whoever's here tonight, they can hear the thought that you've put into creating these quality checks, but also not necessarily quality checks, but preparation for these mentors, right? You're not just going out there and picking anybody, giving them a quick look through and then tossing them out there. You're almost using their skills, refining them towards what BeMo's goals are, and making sure that they go out there and do exactly that. And I think that that's something that's very commendable, and something that I think many students that are looking for these services really want to have. So once again, I appreciate the level of thoroughness that you go into just selecting the mentors alone. In just speaking with that mentorship journey, I think that there is a lot of perseverance that goes in there. You mentioned how much training they have to go into. So I'm going to divert a little bit, and I'm going to ask for what kind of advice you have for students that might have a goal that they think is really out there, or they think that they're not able to achieve. What kind of advice would you say to them to actually go for those, or maybe take a second look, see if it's right for them, along those lines of perseverance, which I'm sure you've definitely honed in on?
So the answer to this requires I don't want to give an answer that could be applied in every situation.
For sure.
I say it depends on where you are. Mm-hmm. Let's say, I'm just going to give an example. Let's say you want to start a business, but you still got to pay the bills. How's that going to happen? So I wouldn't advise that you drop everything, start a business if you're not in a position to do that. It could be started part-time. So if unsure, my sort of strategy has always been, okay, can I just do a little bit to see where this is going to lead? Do I get some signals from the universe that, hey, this is something that people appreciate, something I am good at, before I jump in full-time? And this is not for everyone. I know some people just like to just go for it, just jump in the pool. Essentially, eventually you got to learn to swim. No, I usually say just maybe dip your toes a little bit, see if it's all cool. If it's all cool, then maybe start swimming. And you should also be willing to change course. This is the other thing. If you get too stuck to what you thought is good and you started and you get invested in the wrong thing, which a lot of people do, I've made that mistake a lot, then it's going to be detrimental. There should be also a filter of, hey, okay, this is enough. It's not working out. I got to go back to the drawing board and try again.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a point through your BeMo journey that you, or any of your journeys, where you decided, okay, this isn't right for me, I have to pivot, reevaluate? If there was, could you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
A lot. So first of all, I'm a serial entrepreneur.
Okay.
There's businesses I've started that have failed miserably that you guys don't know about. Why? Because they have failed. I'm not going to tell you about those because they're irrelevant. They were failures. But that's the thing. People don't realize that they have to go do a lot of trial and error and fail a lot of things until a couple of things actually work out. Now, within BeMo itself, again, within any of the companies, there's things that usually don't work out. Like I said at the beginning, actually 80% of stuff don't work out. So, for example, you think you were going to start a new program that students are going to love, and you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes in seven figures, and it just flops. Like nobody likes that. That's not what people want. So, for example, you bring in mentors to mentor students, and you go through the screening, they pass the screening, they pass the training, then there comes the orientation, they do something really weird, and you got to let them go. You're like, oh my God, I invested so much in this person, but it's not working out. So it happens quite a lot, actually. I think a part of it is building the tolerance that things are not going to work and it's okay. So the way I try to enjoy it is I try to focus on the mission and the process, because I know when I wake up in the morning, I already know. In fact, I go at it, enjoying that. Hey, some things are not going to work today. Let's go figure out what those things are. And let's see how many fires we have to put out today. I'm trying to think of anything specific that would be interesting to share with you guys, but I don't actually have a specific moment because it's just always recurring in different contexts. It could be internal, it could be external. We could, for example, disappoint a student, right? You're not perfect. Sometimes we disappoint a student. A lot of times we do really well, but sometimes we disappoint a student. It's like, oh man, this is essentially a failure. I could disappoint internal team members. Yeah. So it could be in any type of context that this could happen in.
Yeah, no, that's very fair, and put you a little bit on the spot there for a specific example. But I think you've now kind of gone into another point that I want to go further on, which is this idea of criticism. So you mentioned whether that be from a student that doesn't necessarily enjoy the service or that doesn't work out. How do you deal with criticism, number one? And the second part of my question is, what advice do you have to anybody that's kind of working up in whatever grind it may be to taking criticism, because it's very important towards that development?
Criticism, again, it's contextual. So you have to put it in the context of what it is and then decide how you're going to react. So a lot of criticism I get is essentially regarding BeMo and what we do at BeMo or how it should be done. It's not necessarily students, because students overwhelmingly are satisfied. The majority are satisfied. But how do I deal with that? I have to figure out the context. Who is the person that's doing this? Is this someone that's got good intention? Is it criticism to help us improve? Or is this someone who doesn't have the context we have and the knowledge we have? Or is this malicious, right? So most of the time, I just try to, if the person is not someone who is giving constructive feedback that I can use, I try to ignore it. Because that's just how it is. I cannot get hung up on somebody thinking something without them knowing the knowledge I have and the context that I'm working with. So that's the thing. So if at all you're going down any sort of a path, and this is, this could be in a student context. This actually happens a lot. You get criticized by your peers about hey, you want to go to med school, you get criticized. You don't want to go to med school, you get criticized, right? That's as basic as that. Any way you go, you get criticized. Who cares? That's not constructive. That's who cares. Just gotta go. You know in your gut, you have more information yourself. If that's the case and it's not constructive, it's irrelevant. It's just you have to eventually get immune to that, because it happens a lot at different stages of life. And the more successful you are, the louder and more frequent it becomes. So the other aspect of this, to help you guys think about this is, again, if it's not constructive, the more you get, that means the more you're doing right. The more of whatever they're criticizing you, you should do more of that, because that means you're on the right path. If it wasn't the right path, it would be crickets. It would be tumbleweed, essentially. There would be nothing. So that, again, is a validation usually, actually. It should fuel your fire to do more.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that's really important that I've noticed in all of your answers is that there's such an importance of context, right? When I asked you about, somebody has a goal or a dream, should they go down that road? Many are quick to say, absolutely follow your dreams. But in reality, it's not that simple, right? You need to, coming back to this research and methodological approach, does it make sense? Do I have the means to actually get to that endpoint? And now with this criticism, everybody is, I think it's quick to say criticism is good. It means it's always constructive, or that's, I think, what we've been trained to believe, that criticism is meant to be constructive. But, keep in mind, there is always that other side to it. It may not always be there. And sometimes you have to be able to weave through those ones that are there to actually, push you forward, and others that are there to hold you back a little bit. And we want to believe that there's more of that criticism that pushes us forward to develop more so. But it's a very important point that you've brought up as well. I think that we're coming close to my end of my question period. So I'm gonna end off with one final question that's quite broad. You've provided us with a lot of inspiration tonight, a lot of advice. But if there was one thing that you want to leave with all of our Ignite members here tonight, a message from you to keep moving forward, other than to use BeMo resources whenever they need, what would that message be?
My message would be essentially what I had to learn over time when I was navigating undergrad years, and I was lost, and where am I going to go? What the hell am I going to do with my life? All of that, which is how do you actually figure that out, though? That's really hard. Like, how do you figure out what do you really want to do? There's like social media, there's peers, there's like, what should you do? I think what I would say is, finding something that is intrinsically motivated, but that in itself is a little bit hard. How do you do that? Here's what you got to ask yourself. Would I do this thing if I was not going to get paid for it? If I was not going to get recognized for it? If I was not going to have anything like, externally rewarding or being punished? Would I do this regardless? And doing a lot of different things to figure that out, because it may not be obvious. For a lot of people, it's not obvious. Some people are gifted or fortunate, I should say, that they know right off the bat what they want to do, and they get fueled. Maybe it's in their environment, but most of us are not like that. So you have to try a lot of different things. And then eventually something clicks. You're like, this is it.
Sorry, the mute button was a little bit stalled there, but no, I think that's a phenomenal point to end off on my question period. I just want to say it's been my privilege to be able to speak with you once again, this pre-med celebrity for us. And I truly hope that we get to cross paths again in the future. But I will pass it over to Victoria right now, as I'm sure there are many people in our audience that have questions for you as well.
For sure, my pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you again for answering all of our questions. It's very, very informative. I know, at least for me, and I'm sure for everyone else here. I just want to say, for anyone who's attending this meeting, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat, and then hopefully we can get to answering some of them.
Maybe we can give it like a minute or so, people just to type in their questions and get that going. I think I see some people's hands are raised. If you guys can put it in the chat, that would be super helpful, just because we have such a large group that it's hard for us to manage that. It's easier to manage in the chat. I know it's a little bit extra work to type it, but hopefully that will be doable. Perfect. I think we have our first question in here. I'll send it over to you, Victoria.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our first question from the chat is, what did some what is some advice people who are currently applying to med school or would like to apply in the future?
So this would be, I would need probably a little bit more context of the, what do you need to do at what stage? Are we applying right now or planning for the application process? Because they would require a little bit different strategies. If you're applying right now, this essentially the strategy is you have to make sure you balance all the things that they're going to look at. So in fact, I will actually give you 3-4 specific things that we do with our own students. One, figuring out what schools are best and only applying to those schools rather than applying to every school under the sun. A lot of people make that mistake, but that actually dilutes your efforts. And you have a limited amount of time. It's better to make that application to a few schools where you have a realistic chance and do those really well rather than diluting your effort. Two, making sure that any application documents you send is flawless and actually answering the questions, because some of them have a standard personal statement, some of them have a sketch, some of them have essay questions, and a lot of times students answer the essay questions. It may be like great grammar, all of that, but it doesn't answer the question. You're just trying to be political, for example, so that's not good. And so that's an application component, or let's say written application. Then when it comes to Casper and interviews, prepare in advance. Prepare in advance. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to use services like BeMo. That's not what that means, but you still got to prepare in advance. Because remember, one of the things that some students forget is that this whole admissions test, a part of it is how conscientious are you? What do conscientious people do? Well, they plan things in advance. They don't go into like an interview acting all nervous and weird and all that stuff, even though it's like, it's a huge deal being in an interview. But you could get over that so that at least you could be fluid. If you do a little bit of practice, you do the right practice, you get some feedback. So that's what I would say. And now, if you're thinking of planning and you're not applying right now, I would work myself my way backwards. It's like, what do I have to do now to be able to have that fantastic application documents when I tell my story? So I would mostly think about the courses I got to take, so that I have all the requirements, so that I broaden my scope of where I could apply, and balance that with other courses that I actually like. Well, hopefully you like everything pre-med. Otherwise, well, you shouldn't go to med school, maybe. That's a given. So I assume that you like all of those. And also getting involved in the right research, extracurriculars, volunteerism. You have to set those in advance, because when application time comes, you can't just make those things up. And if you just try to do something 2 weeks before just so you could put in your application, they'll know that's what you've done. There's going to be 100 other people who have not done that and have planned in advance. I hope that answers that question somewhat.
Yeah, so I think that answered the question. Thank you. And I know so many times people save things until the last minute, and then everyone is scrambling to try to figure something out, and it's tough. Kind of talking about that, what do you think a valuable skill set would be for a student to have for med school applications, starting from the get-go?
A valuable skill, I think, that would really help, which I feel like a lot of pre-meds don't necessarily have, because that's not part of the normal training, is both written and verbal communication skills. Somehow developing that early on, because that's what a lot of people struggle with when they're creating those applications or where they go for an interview, because that's just not what the actual program usually teaches you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Lots of the time, I know for me, I'm in a science degree and we are just bombarded with science, but no one teaches you these sort of life skills. Kind of diverting from that, someone had another question. How did you start your business specifically in Canada? Was there like a specific process? And like, if you could explain on how that process works, maybe give us like a 20,000 foot view from it.
Sure. I mean, most geographical locations is very similar, actually. When you start a business, you have to figure out the legal requirements for starting a business. And this could be a partnership, this could be a corporation, this could be a limited liability corporation. And the best way to do that is, essentially Google that kind of stuff. That's what I did, good old Dr. Google. And then you figure out where you have to go to file for that legal entity. Because the alternative is, well, there is no legal entity and it's just yourself. There is pros and cons, but then I'm saying the legal entity because the question said a company, and that's what I'm assuming. Because if you just do it by yourself, it's not really a company, and it will just go so far. You will need a lot of people, and that corporation allows you provides that legal framework for you to be able to essentially become an employer and bring more people in to help with the mission.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. Things are hard, and sometimes you just got to keep going with it. For the next question, someone asked, for creating a startup business as a pre-med or researcher, someone who doesn't have a lot of time to juggle some extracurricular activities, how did you manage your time between, I'm sure you had a million different things going on. So how did you manage your time with all of those?
The best way, it's the same thing I do right now, actually, is what works for me is having a very structured 6 days a week. I have a structured life. Everything is in the calendar. Every moment is accounted for. And I have a specific routine. So I batch my similar activities to different days of the week. And this keeps repeating over and over and over again. So having a routine and a schedule is essentially what has helped me be able to juggle a lot of different things.
I like that you actually mentioned 6 days a week it's structured, because I know, at least for myself, I try to busy myself every single day. And I know, especially as students and as everyone, you're super busy all the time. So I'd like that you give yourself 6 days a week it's structured, and then one day for whatever kind of thing.
Exactly. So that one day is, you catch up with, essentially the people that you want to associate with, your family and friends and other obligations, and also just leave it for creativity, because structure is great for productivity, but it kills creativity. So you have to keep balancing those two. Which one is more? For me right now, I have enough creativity. I need more structure. So the mind is heavily on structure versus unstructured. Depends. You maybe try to start something that requires 6 days a week unstructured. If you're a writer, for example, that's probably what works best. If you're a painter, etc., it depends.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you need that extra day or that extra time to just not have something set in stone. And as you mentioned, you have that day off for the creativity. So what do you do necessarily with that time off, with that creativity?
It's essentially the only time of the week where I don't have any agenda. It's just, there is no agenda. So I try to do things as random as I can, because sometimes doing things random allows you to come up with ideas, or you see patterns that you've missed. I go places I normally don't go, and just it's done in no particular order, which is actually very hard. Once you've been very accustomed to a structured schedule, which is most of my time, it's very hard to all of a sudden go unstructured, because you want to be like, it feels like you're missing something in your life all of a sudden. But all of that allows you to bring in the creativity and parts of your brain that normally you don't focus on. So you'll start to make some connections. A lot of my good ideas have come during the times when I'm actually resting, either doing absolutely nothing or just doing things that are just completely random. I could just be going, for example, grocery shopping. I could be, hanging out with a friend. I could be just calling a family member. And those are the moments that actually provide that extra rest your brain needs to be like, aha, this makes more sense. The other thing was stupid. Never do that again. Let's do this thing. Or like brand new things come in that you could experiment for, when you go back to that structured life.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially, I think this is kind of where that term shower thoughts comes in, because when you're doing nothing, when you're forced to do nothing, you get hit with all these good ideas. So
Exactly.
I think it's super important for that time off to just let your brain do what it wants. For the next question, someone wanted to know, is it common, if you know, to get a master's or a PhD before applying to medical school? And do you think, are there specific advantages or disadvantages of this route?
It is not common. If you look at statistics, most people who get into most med schools, going from pre-med, then they go to med school, or they have just an undergraduate degree. It's a minority who has a graduate degree. Advantages, it depends on the school. Some schools care, they give you a few percentage points. Others don't care at all, and they only look at your undergrad. And then there's some others where they don't really give you points, but they allow the research experience you've had to be used as real research experience that you would not have had as an undergrad.
Yeah, I think lots of people are searching for ways to, sort of up their resume, but, sometimes those don't always work. You had mentioned before it's important to dip your toes in before getting into a field. So do you know of some ways you can test out if you like entrepreneurship early on as a student?
For sure. It's the best way to do this is to see if you're okay with a few things. And not everyone is okay with it, and totally is okay, because, well, different people do different things, and that's how the world works. That's like exactly what we want. We don't want everyone to be an entrepreneur. We don't want everybody to be a doctor. But for an entrepreneur, there's a few things that you need, and ways you could test it is, first of all, is there a need for something that you could charge for as soon as possible? You could start very low just to see if there's any traction. You don't have to charge something that people might be turned off because of the cost when you're not well established. So that's one, is figuring out, okay, what is it that I want to do, and are people going to pay for it? So here's the thing about entrepreneurship. You could have a lot of ideas, but if they don't turn into something that someone else is willing to pay you for it, you got nothing. So you got to, as quickly as possible, try to sell this thing that you have. So what could it be? Is it consulting? Is it a product? Is it a product that maybe you're acting as a third-party seller? That's probably some of the easiest things you could do, acting as a third-party seller. So it's not really your product or service. You're just acting as an intermediary. Then here's the other realization you need to have is that, are you okay selling that? Not everybody is cool with selling stuff. Are you okay to market yourself or that thing and sell it? And that's why I say it's best to start very small, because if you start very small, you also realize if you have all of those little qualities that you need to be an entrepreneur.
I definitely think it's important to have the thing of starting small. I don't know anything about entrepreneurship, but I'm sure lots of people go for a big jump and they're not ready. And that might lead to a failed potential business, which is unfortunate, of course. We still have time for one more question. Regarding the current pandemic, what would you recommend undergraduates to do to sort of counteract the limited research opportunities?
So this is a common question, actually. We get this a lot. there are few things you could do. Is you have to see if there's any way you could work remotely. So it doesn't have to be, hey, I got to hold a pipette in a laboratory or dissect mice or any of that, because there's other ways and other projects that don't require the person to be hands-on. So for example, they may ask you to do some literature research and see if there's certain dots that you could connect for their research project. It could be a project that's in, let's say, data analysis is required, in which case, again, you could participate. So best way to do that is, getting in touch with potential supervisors that could help you out and asking them if they have such a project for you to get in touch, so that, because of the pandemic, things are going to go up and down at different times and you don't want that interruption. You want to be able to have something that, no matter whether there's a lockdown or not, you could be able to do this right from the comfort of your home on a computer with access to internet. And guess what? A lot of them do. And most research groups, if they're active research groups, they're always understaffed. So they would love for someone to come and help, maybe with their data analysis, maybe putting things together. Maybe they have the data, they want to create a nice way to present it. Those are the things you could get involved with. And over time, they're going to trust you more. That's the other key. If you don't have any experience, they're not going to trust you with their key project right away. You have to show them that you're good, you're conscientious, you pay attention to detail. As soon as they do, they're going to give you more. And then eventually, before you know it, you end up being a co-author. So that's the way I would approach it. And I wouldn't get discouraged if people say no. But sometimes if they say no, it may be because you've asked for too much too soon. So if you lower your expectations and you're willing to do essentially anything, you could even say that you're willing to do it as a volunteer. So you don't really care about the pay, you care about the experience. They're more likely to open up and say, hey, how can I see if I can use this person's help to get to the next stage. And in the process, you actually end up maybe doing a lot of cool stuff.
I, again, completely agree. It's with those small steps, I think, that one little stepping stone, even as a volunteer for a lab, can really push you for that next time you might ask to get a paid position or whatever position you might be looking for. So that pretty much covers it. I just want to say to everyone, join IGNITE, please. Shameless plug.